line it's not being reused effectively, then it makes it a shame of the system. Why are we being encouraged to do something that doesn't get recycled correctly at the end of the day?
How burning waste creates more carbon emissions than you think.
Burning plastics in incinerators is dirtier than burning coal.
And is the shift to incineration holding back recycling rates?
There are a lot of people who are highly incentivised to incinerate waste because of the investments we make in waste power plants.
Plus, how councils are locked into multi-million-pound contracts forcing them to incinerate waste for decades to come.
What happens is that your household recycling waste is misused. Instead of being recycled, it is feeding the incinerator.
A little something on it. I think members have received several reports on this project as it's developed. The report provides an update on progress and seeks authority to put in place the necessary arrangements to move forward. The project does involve 7 councils. All the Tees Valley authorities, Darlington County Council and Newcastle City Council are also joining the partnership. All partners are currently seeking a similar approvals to those being sought through this report tonight. All partners are seeking to have approval to form a new limited company through a local authority special purpose vehicle to enable the procurement of a contractor to design, build, operate and finance a new energy recovery facility. The new facility will be built and located in South Tees Development Corporation site in Redcar, and as such is proposed that Redcar and Darlington Borough Council will be the host for the newly formed company who will manage the contract. The new contract facility will be based on the principles of council waste hierarchy to minimise the amount of waste going to landfill. Our priorities are to minimise, to reuse, recycle, energy recovery and then landfill. The strategy and business case are developed on achieving a high percentage of recycling and minimising the waste going to the energy recovery facility. As such, the contract is incentivised to ensure as much waste is recycled as possible. It's in all our interests, both environmentally and financially, to send the minimum amount of waste to the energy recovery facility. The waste that does go to the energy recovery facility will generate enough electricity for 60,000 households and in the future provide heat to local businesses. The plant is being future-proof for access to potential development of carbon capture underground storage. This would allow CO2 to be captured and stored through the infrastructure that is to be developed by the Northern Enduring Partnership as part of the East Coast Cluster. This could lead to the TVERF effectively being a net negative carbon emitter. The project maximises the economies of scale of combining a number of authorities in partnership to secure the value for money for the public. It must be recognised that there will always be a need to treat residual waste. That can't be reused or recycled, and energy recovery is the preferred approach in a agreed waste hierarchy over landfill. For comparison, energy recovery typically produces around 200 kilograms less CO2 emissions for every tonne of residual waste processed compared to landfill. The project will seek to use the remaining products from the process into other uses before landfill is even considered. It is a highly technical and complex project, and there remain numerous matters to resolve over the coming stages of the project. And any material matters that do come up affecting the project will be subject to further report. I ask that members approve the recommendations as detailed in paragraph 20 for the reasons listed in paragraph 21.
Thank you,
Hello, can you hear me? In the likely event that the government includes incineration in the emissions trading scheme, or ETS, as is currently being proposed, have calculations been done to factor in ETS costs and how they affect overall viability of the plant for its 30-year plus lifespan? And if so, where have these been published? Also, where's the evidence that we still require 450,000 tonnes of new incineration capacity, given that there are already 3 nearby operational incinerators with a combined capacity of more than 1.25 million tonnes per annum, and given the government's stated intention to halve residual waste sent to incineration by 2042, that could be expected to free up more than 600,000 tonnes at the 3 existing incinerators in the area.
On the first question, I'll have to get back to the detail of that, Paul. I don't have those figures.
Yeah, would it be possible to send them to me?
We'll get a written response back to you on that.
Right.
On the evidence, I think each of the local authorities in their own space at some time have looked at the historical and future usage for waste, and when this proposal was originally the 5 Tees Valley councils, there were studies done, and they also did some consultation work on that. Those studies were around the future growth of the area and also the usage. And I'm sure Newcastle and Durham have done the same thing, and they've came on board, and the economies of scale make it a worthwhile venture for everybody because of the costs. So that evidential package, let me follow up and try and get something to you on that evidential package, as well as where those studies were, where the information came from. And in the 2042 stuff, I would ask if you could send me that question in writing, so I can get the detail of it, and I'll give you a written response to that as well. I think there's a lot in that question that I need to, have to have a look at. The detail there's quite a lot of detail behind that.
Right, so would you like me to email you the whole question?
Please, if you could do that, that would be valuable, and I'll get you a written answer on that. And we'll try and respond to you as quickly as we can respond to you.
Okay.
All right.
Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Foster, for your attendance.
Thank you.
The parts together. Right. Do members have any questions to Councillor Keir? Yes, thank you, Councillor Sneddon.
Thank you. I've had several sent through to me, so I'll try not to do them all at once to give Councillor Keir a fair crack at answering them. The first one was paragraph 10, where the incinerator is referred to as producing renewable energy. The Renewable Energy Directive, 23rd of April 2009, lists all the sources of energy generation that can be referred to as renewable, and the incineration of municipal waste does not appear on that list. I was just wondering why it is that we're choosing to refer to it as renewable energy. Was this an oversight, an error? Because I'm very keen that the council doesn't seem to be trying to greenwash something, and the public might see that as being misleading. There are plenty of other sources of renewable energy, but this isn't one. So that was a particular question that I've been asked to ask you, Councillor Keir. The other questions are regarding what is going to go there, because we've been told in the net zero strategy that we're going to be reducing our amount of waste going to landfill, but also the amount of waste going to the incinerator. And across England, about 80% of municipal waste is currently recyclable or is set to be replaced with recyclable products, according to the net zero strategy, meaning that the majority of the waste going to incineration will be plastics, which emit about 1 tonne of CO2 for every tonne of waste sent to incinerator. So, in effect, we're going to be burning what was once oil. So the CO2 equivalent coming out of plastics going to incinerator is higher than that going to landfill. The final one is regarding how the operator is going to demonstrate their ongoing reduction of carbon emissions year on year. How will that be measured? Will it be measured in tonnes of CO2 per tonne of waste going in through the gate? What will be the fines to the operator for every year they miss? And what would happen with subsequent year failures? And is, in the event that the operator continues to miss those targets, is there some sort of break contract that would allow us to take control of the situation? Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor Striker. Paragraph 10, the word renewal, it is changing state something. We could call it recovery, I think. If that's what you want to do, it's fair enough. If you want definitions in there, I'm quite happy. I think the officer will have a look at that and see what that definition really means there. On waste recovery, the majority of plastics, as time goes through, and hopefully all the lobbying and everything that's been done by government agencies, groups like yourself, to remove the one-time plastic usage and plastics that are not recyclable, get them in the system. That's going to take some time, but in the meantime we'll have to do something about that. And I think the recovery process is a step up in the hierarchy of waste, and even that, as I said before, the IPCC agrees that it is better. Anything going into that particular step above landfill is a better place to go. So I think it's taking us a trajectory, taking us up that step, I think is right. I think as we go through, we have to find better ways of segregating plastics from the general waste, and that's something that we will be looking at going forward to prevent that particular type of stuff going to the landfill in the first place. If we don't have any non-reusable plastics, that would be better. So there's a lot of lobbying to be done at the top end of that stuff that in that area that we have to go. So the direction of travel is to step up that hierarchy. I think we're pretty early in the stages where I thought government would have done a bit more. I thought we would have had supermarkets, for example, are starting to do stuff now. So we need to encourage them to continue doing that, so we don't have the plastics coming through that are not required. So remove the need for those plastics. So that's all part of an ongoing process. And as we go into the energy recovery part of it, if we do have the carbon capture, then that will help as well. But even IPCC numbers say that it's better to incinerate than it is to have landfill methane and everything else. So I think controlling that is going to be difficult, but I think that's the direction we'll have to do. You're absolutely right with plastic. So I think we've got a lot of work to do in there, and we'll certainly be looking at that. But I think the direction we're going with waste recovery, I think is correct for the situation we're in just now. So that's fine. And demonstrate, well, I think that's all part of how the operation works. There'll be the legislative stuff where the Environmental Agency will be certainly doing that, but obviously we'll have governance over some of that stuff as well. As our officer will be part of that board of directors, and it'll be on them to make sure that we're performing to the standards and the specifications that are demanded. And obviously we will hold that board and that operational group to account to make sure that they're satisfying the emissions legislation requirements that they need to meet. So that's part of this tonight, to start getting that board in place. How that's done and the technicality of that, well, we don't have it there, but there'll be specifications there that we will be holding those manufacturers to. And as we work through that, then obviously you can raise those questions again as to what the actual technical nature of them are, but obviously the Environmental Agency will be the overseer of everything that's there from an emission standpoint, what that unit puts out. Us as an operating group, or the Tees Valley and the other authorities, we have to oversee that, and have to be very rigid, very pedantic about that as well. So that's where we have to be. So I would say that as we go forward with this, that demonstration of A10, what those specifications will be, will come out through the build specs, etc. And we have to make sure that those are demonstrated before signing in and off. And then operationally, then it'll be up to us through our board member to make sure that board of directors are holding the operational part of that account to meet the environmental agency standards.
Thank you, Chair. If I may just come back on that one. Councillor, you may have misunderstood me. Apologies if it was my fault. We were talking about emissions in as much as toxic emissions from the Environment Agency. It was a clear statement in this document that the carbon emissions from this plant will reduce year on year. And so my question was, how are we going to manage that when CCS is only a potential development? I noticed that we talked about that in the document as being potential, and you said it could be a net zero emitter. The industry costing is £128 million to fit CCS to a plant of this scale, and it will add £5 million a year in operating costs. And so if this plant is going to be reducing its carbon emissions each year from the first year of operation, I'm just interested to know how we're going to ensure that is going to happen. Thank you.
Thank you for that. One of the things you mentioned was plastic, so getting better segregation of the waste so that we understand what's what. And as we go through the process in the future, if we get carbon capture, then that takes out the equation altogether. I understand what you're saying around carbon capture costs, but that's one of the areas in the North East that I'm sure you've heard the Mayor say they want to become the carbon capture capital of the UK and Europe. So there are things coming along that we hope we can plug in. We're future-proofing. We're hopeful for future-proofing this facility to be able to accommodate that. And in the meantime, the other attacks are about reducing plastics, and that's the other areas at the other levels of the hierarchy where we'll have to be. We'll have to get the suppliers, we'll have to get the people who produce these more toxic plastics, if you like, to stop them producing them and try and get the plastics that can be recycled and reused and substitute those so that that plastic isn't getting into that particular system. That's the plan going forward, and I think that's the way we're going to reduce that carbon emissions going forward. And I would hope that everybody's in agreement that if you go the further up the hierarchy you go, the more difficult it becomes. But I think it's the areas that we have to concentrate on, and I think it's areas that, being honest, we need to start focusing on a bit more for that. So it's about eliminating those toxic components that we don't need to put in the system in the first place. That's the key.
Thank you, Councillor Keir, for a very detailed response. Are there any other questions to Councillor?
Taking us away from landfill is much better for the environment. The carbon and the release from a carbon capture facility, done correctly and done to specifications, is by far better than going to landfill with your other contaminants going there as well. So even if we don't have the carbon capture, in my view, and reading the specification and reading where we're going up the hierarchy, that is still a better situation to be in. But absolutely, if we get carbon capture, that would be the
Thank you, Councillor Keir. Yes, Councillor Parker.
Thank you, Chair. In a sense, some of what you said today, I feel there's a contradiction in the contract. You've talked a lot about the need to move waste up the hierarchy. Over the last few decades, we've gone from a situation where virtually all of our rubbish was landfilled to a situation where much is reused, much is recycled, and the amount that is residual waste that we struggle to do anything with is diminished over time. And presumably going forward, that will continue to happen as we become clever at extracting materials and more sensible in our choice of materials in the first place. But I'm also aware that the plant such as this, by its very nature in terms of how it works from a financial perspective, must require on an ongoing basis a minimal amount of rubbish to burn. Otherwise, in terms of its running on a day-to-day basis, it makes no financial sense. So one presumes that going forward there is a minimum requirement in terms of tonnage that the plant will require to make it financially viable. And if we go below that, then we're in trouble in terms of the financial viability of the plant. But that then artificially puts in a floor in terms of, as in a ceiling floor, of how much rubbish we need to provide. And if, as we will become clever in the waste that we generate and how we can extract stuff from it, there hopefully will become a point in the future where we don't actually need to send as much to it as the plant demands in terms of its finances. So how do we square that circle in terms of the fact that the plant will need a minimum amount of tonnage to, in a decade or so's time when we are far clever in terms of extracting things from waste so that we diminish our waste to a much lesser extent than we have today. So I suppose what I'm asking is how are we projecting forward our ability to reduce the waste that we need to dispose of in the manner that this plant will dispose of it.
Thank you, Councillor Haskell. That's an absolutely fair question to ask, and I think it's a question that I have asked several times myself, and I think it's a balance. We have to set the bar somewhere to make the plant viable. We are nowhere near that bar in respect to what we produce just now. It's a very difficult target to achieve over time. But the incinerator of it is essentially recycling goods gives us revenue, and sending it to a recovery facility causes us cost. And it's that balance in keeping that revenue stream, getting recycling as much as possible to try and hit that target floor ceiling, whatever you want to call it. And if all of the authorities do that, then that opens up other opportunities to take maybe even some other forms of maybe commercial waste or other things in there from other authorities. But certainly for us just now, the floor or the ceiling of the set guarantee number is a balance. It's a very difficult, I think it's a really difficult target to achieve, but if we achieve it, then we're all winning, because it means we're recycling and we're getting good results for our recycling, and it means that we're sending the minimum amount to the recovery centre. So that's the best answer I can give you just now in respect to where that's set. And going forward, I think the absolute aim is to get as much as possible recycled, and it's how we go about that, getting that message out to people that recycling is the way to go. The facility in itself will obviously be looking at other ways to stay viable. If every council gets down to that level, and I'm not saying they will, I'm just saying if we all get to that level, then I'm sure there are other areas where we could look at to try and pull in some more waste to keep the place viable. That would be my longer term view, and that's just my view on that, on going in the contract, that the incentivisation around the waste recovery facility, we have to meet a set number because they need to be viable. But that number, the number of where we're at, is very low compared to where we are today. And if we ever achieve the level that we've had the ceiling or the floor, then I'd be really chuffed. I think Darlington would be doing a great job, and just recycling rates would be really high, and we'd be sending very little to the landfill centre, the recovery facility in relative terms. So, it is a hard target to achieve. It's a balance. I mean, you can maybe say it's got to be this, you could say that, somebody else would say that, but I think over the course of the contract, where it's struck just now, I think it's pretty fair.
Thank you, Councillor Kerr.
If I may, please.
Briefly.
Yes. So presumably what you're saying is then, if we are more successful in dealing with our waste, and we get to the point where we no longer need to produce what that minimum tonnage is, then in a sense we're stuck with the contracts. And we'll end up having to send stuff there because that's what the contract says, rather than actually being in a better situation where
You're saying
Councillor Harker, is that a question or a comment?
it's a genuine question about it. If we get to the point where we don't need to send that amount of stuff to the plant to process because we're being more successful in how we manage our waste, do we still have to send the waste to burn? Because that would be a nice situation to find ourselves up in.
There would be either that or we pay additional costs, and if we're recycling so well and with what the revenue for those additional costs we're more than covered across the no sending stuff to waste like that. So again, it's back to the balance. I mean, I don't have that number or the figures, but the principle would be that for me that we have such a difficult target that if we ever do get there, then the benefits of the revenue side and everything else, and also the opportunity to bring something else in, fill any gaps that we would have in respect to the costs or the numbers that we have to achieve to meet the revenue for the facility. So those would be the avenues that I'd be exploring if I was that board of directors in Darlington was way down here. Absolutely, we're looking for other. You have to look at other sources Councillor Harker, and that's the direction I would like to go in. As I say, if we are recycling to those levels midway through the contract of the 2035, then I'd be really chuffed. It means we're doing something right. And I hear what you're saying about the payments, but I would hope that the recycling and the benefits that we have on one side would outweigh any costs that we have to pay on the other side.
Thank you, Councillor Kerr. The items have been moved and seconded. Can we agree item 7B and part 3